Greetings and welcome. My name is Akasemi Newsome, and I'm the Associate Director of the Institute of European Studies here at UC Berkeley. It is exciting to see so many of you from around the world who have tuned in to our event today on sustainable transportation and smart cities. This conversation is part of our new series here at the Institute on science, technology, and innovation for a sustainable future, which is presented in partnership with our fellow Austria Centers of North America and with the Office of Science and Technology of the Austrian Embassy in Washington, D.C. Today's session is also co-sponsored by the UC Berkeley Institute of Transportation Studies and the Berkeley Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Julia Nelson, who's the program manager for Austrian Studies at our institute. She'll introduce the moderator for this discussion. Welcome again.
Thank you, Akasemi. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our panel this morning or this evening from wherever you're signing in. Sustainability is one of our key shared priorities for this year. And with these transatlantic conversations, our goal is to bring experts together in dialogue to share creative approaches to it across different fields, from environmental science to engineering to the arts and humanities. I'm going to post in the chat a link to our webpage where we have the full lineup of our panels so far. This is the third installment of the series. And so I'd encourage you to visit it and check out videos of our past events. Today's session focuses on sustainable transportation and smart cities. Bridging California and Europe, our panelists will consider trends and dynamics around mobility and automation that are predicted to impact the future of urban transportation systems. I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Joanna Pirker, who's an assistant professor, software engineer, and researcher at the Institute of Interactive Systems and Data Science at Graz University of Technology in Austria. Dr. Pirker brings an interdisciplinary perspective to our conversation. Her research interests include AI, data analysis, virtual reality, immersive environments, and games research. She's authored and presented numerous publications in her field and lectured at universities such as Harvard, Berlin, Humboldt Universität, and the University of Göttingen. So I'll turn it over to Joanna to introduce our speakers today.
Thank you so much, Julia. I'm so excited to be here. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone from wherever you are joining us today and watching us now. I'm so honored to moderate this excellent panel today, and I really want to thank the organizer for putting together this really important, outstanding event series on innovation and sustainability. We have such an interesting lineup of panelists today with an excellent and especially diverse and interdisciplinary background. And I think this really highlights the necessity to bring together researchers all around the world of different topics to tackle the field of sustainable transportation methods. So I'm very excited to start introducing our panelists today. I want to start with Professor Günter Emberger, who is head of the Research Center for Transport Planning and Traffic Engineering within the Institute for Transport Science at the Vienna University of Technology. His research centers on climate neutral, renewable, and conventional energy supply systems. He has authored over 10 books and 80 journal articles in the areas of traffic modeling, human-friendly planning, and accessibility, mobility, and statistical evaluations. I'm also super excited to welcome Susan Shaheen, who is a professor at Civil and Environmental Engineering and director of the Innovative Mobility Research Lab and co-director of the Transportation Sustainability Research Center at UC Berkeley. She's an internationally recognized leader in future mobility strategies and focuses on areas including automated vehicles and shared mobility, eco-driving, smart parking management, and infrastructure for electric and hybrid vehicles. So welcome. And also a very, very interesting and outstanding panelist from a different field is Alexander Keimer, who is a researcher at UC Berkeley at the Institute of Transportation Studies. Previously, he taught applied mathematics at the Friedrich Alexander University of Erlangen-Nuremberg in Germany. And his research and publications focus on traffic flow modeling and routing on large-scale networks based on real-time information provided by routing applications. So this is really exciting because you can see, we have such a highly excellent international and interdisciplinary panelists round with us today. And the next hour is dedicated to discussions about creating sustainable and low emission mobility and transportation involving road, rail, air, marine transportations is a major contributor to global emission, as we all know. And as you know, many initiatives and plans such as the European Green Deal, the Paris Agreement, Biden's net zero plan by 2050 are in place to achieve a climate neutral future for all of us. And I would like to open up this panel by inviting our panelists to describe how their research connects and fits the broader goals to do carbon dioxide reduction strategies in place. And maybe I can also ask the panelists to give us a little bit of a broader pictures on how the Californian and the Austrian research and development efforts and also your efforts in these areas compare with the rest of the world. May I start by inviting Günter Emberger by sharing these elements?
Yes, of course. First of all, warmly welcome also from my side. I'm very happy that I am here, and I'm very happy that I have the opportunity to talk to you, because it's always interesting that I have to be invited to a panel like this to meet people like Joanna, which are also very close to me in Austria. And I think maybe we can also exchange some knowledge later on. I think it's very interesting. Also, Susan, when I read your CV, I think normally we should have met somewhere in the world, because we are both very involved in WCTR and TRP and all this stuff. So I think transport world is very, very small. Just coming back to your question. So my first statement will be that sustainable transport is very, very important. I'm now in the field of transport planning since 1990. And since then, I'm working in the field of sustainable transport. And one side, I have to be honest, I'm not very optimistic. So because in the last 30 years or 30 years, not a lot happened. We still are following the path that we foster car traffic around the world, more or less in all continents, not only in the UK and not only in the United States, but also in Europe. And also when I look to Asia, what happens there is the same. So this is really one of the problems what we have at the moment. And car dominance is very, very high. And now we have some new trends there, and Susan will tell us quite a lot more of that of automated vehicle on something like this. And we also carried out some research in this field, and to reach climate neutral mobility, automated vehicles will not be a solution, say it in this way, but I am looking forward to discuss this later on. And so what I want to say is, we as human beings, we have to change our habits significantly. And I think this has not much to do with technology, but I think this is the first thing I will stop here now and ask and wait what other people will tell. And then we go into the discussion. Looking forward.
Thank you so much. Susan, may I invite you to proceed?
Yes, thank you. And I'm so grateful to have an opportunity to meet you all. It seems, I agree, Günter, that our paths should have crossed earlier, and I'm delighted that they crossed today for all of us. In response to Johanna's question about where my work and the work of the Transportation Sustainability Research Center at UC Berkeley comes together with the goal of carbon neutrality, I've been working on the future of transportation systems for more or less my entire focus on transportation, which is over 20 years now. And I tend to focus on the role of advanced technology, not so much because I'm bullish that advanced technology is going to solve it all. I think I became attracted to it because I was skeptical that technology was the answer. And so a lot of my work does not focus on one particular technology, but on a whole range of technologies or strategies that have been heralded as methods that we could use to reduce carbon. And the first area that I started to work on very early days was electrification. So I've done a lot of work in this space, including working with hydrogen. and natural gas vehicles. I've also done about 2 decades worth of work on automation. And I think my deepest area of work is in the area of sharing and digitization of information that can be used to advance sharing and sharing of vehicles that range from electric bikes and electric scooters to pedal-based bicycles, all the way up to microtransit types of vehicles. The area of work that I focus on the most is the social and environmental impacts of these technologies and systems and the interface between travel behavior and public policy in response to these technologies. I think today, my biggest concern is changing behavior in a way that results in a socially equitable and just outcome. And I think we've got a lot of challenges ahead as we face that. And I'm looking forward to talking to you all more about my concerns about social equity and the environment.
Thank you so much. Very important topic, which we'll make sure to cover later on. May I ask Alexander Keimer to also introduce your field? Thank you so much.
Yes. No, thank you. And also thanks for being allowed to be here and to talk today, and happy to meet you all. Yeah, I guess I would totally agree with Günter, although I'm a mathematician. So basically, obviously, working really more from the, let's say, modeling and let's say numerical side of things. And I guess my main concern would also be that we basically play a lot with technological solutions, and in the end, it's really questionable whether they help too much. I will tell you why. We work on 2 projects in particular when it comes to let's say car traffic, which I guess in particular in the US and also in specific countries in Europe is it's still a huge thing, right? And when you look from this perspective, there one really very direct thing would be routing applications, right, and their impact on society. And the other thing is that you would try to smooth traffic, right? And each time, basically, to use or to improve the system, you will use information, right? But so information about the network state, right? Information about other cars. So basically, you will always try to use technology, but with the outcome that you might improve the system, but maybe the demand then changes as well, right? So the demand, so people would like to travel maybe more, right? Which of course gives a direct feedback loop. And also the question is whether it really makes so much difference to smooth it, right? Because in the end, you still have cars, right? You have a lot of traffic participants. And even if you optimize the system, you still have a very, very strong, let's say, baseline. And I guess to some extent, there are several different projects where we work on and where you can really say, well, we would hope, for instance, in high traffic situations, maybe to save something like 20% of fuel emissions, right? And obviously in the system itself, this looks huge and it might be actually really reasonable. But the problem is when you look on the big thing, right, 20% of a reduction might not be, or is for sure not enough. I guess Günter and presumably also Susan can say more about this. But to me also, it feels like, yes, we need to change our thinking significantly more, and I guess we don't tackle it on the full scale. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I hope I already can see how excited I am about this panel because of the different point of view. So we're gonna have an interesting hour. Alexander, can I? Because you just mentioned the power of mathematics and for this research field, and this is something which is often not clear how those different disciplines can actually contribute to our shared common goal. And could you elaborate a little bit, like how mathematics, computer science research can be in general contribute to sustainability goals?
Yes, of course. And so in the end, it's always the same. So, I mean, obviously, I am talking as a mathematician, but the thing is always the same, right? You have a complex system, and to some extent, you try to model the system, right? And the model of the system somehow is done by specific assumptions and by specific equations, which, of course, should be somehow physically reasonable. right? And then you make some choices, because in the end, the model should not be too complex, right? Because if it's too complex, you will see a lot of noise and things which you might not be able to interpret. But obviously, it should also not be too easy, because when it's too easy, you cannot describe what you actually want to see, right? So that's already non-trivial. But let's say, given that you have such a type of model, or maybe a system of models, right? Because you could imagine that you might need a model for traffic flow when you would like to model traffic flow, but you might also need a model for determining the demand, which is time dependent, right? So basically, when do people leave, etc., right? And you might need another model for specific parts of traffic flow or for other types of commuting, right? And let's say you have now this huge model. Then, of course, you can just say, well, to some extent, we need to calibrate it, right? So basically, we use a bit of statistical data and data which is currently available. And then you somehow calibrate the model. Obviously, you can only calibrate it to a certain, let's say, precision, because again, in the end, it's human behavior, right? So human behavior to forecast is very difficult. But let's say you have it at least in an average sense, right? And then basically the next step is that you can say, now let's look what happens when we change specific input parameters of this model, right? And one specific input parameter could be how expensive is it, for instance, to take an Uber, right? Or how expensive it is to drive faster or slower, right? What would a speed limit impose, etc., right? And all this, of course, can always be termed in terms of mathematics, right? And then you would look at the results, and then you would hope to see some, let's say, behavior which could advise you how you could change the system to improve it, right? So that would be, let's say, on the level of cars, right? Or on the level of traffic. But obviously you can also scale it up, right? And can say you have different commodities, right? And you could even try to change modes, etc. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So Günter, you start.
Thank you very much, Alex, for your good short introduction to transport modeling. And this is also something I'm not so in mathematics as you are, but I started also with that, and I started with the normal traditional 4-stage model. I know all transport modelers know this, what's going on, but the most important thing is that this is something what was missing in the past, is that we have feedbacks in the models. And it's really one of the problems. We are not working with a linear system, and therefore the old 4-stage models are blind on one eye, because they are just focusing on traffic flow, but they don't focus more maybe on land use, transport interaction, because if we have a faster transport system, people don't save time in the long run. But they change the location, and also the settlement structure is adapting to this, and also the location of companies is adapting to this. And this was one of the big mistakes what we have made in the past 40, 50 years. And we still use these 4-stage models for decision making. And still we have this homo economicus in our brain, that we say, okay, time savings are very important. And we know nowadays that you can't save time, because people tend, at least this is our approach, people tend to be mobile about 70 to 80 minutes a day. And if they save some time for one purpose, say they can travel faster to work or something, then they spend the time somewhere else for leisure trips or something like this. And this has very strong impacts. And if you take this into consideration, you come to completely new conclusions in the system. And therefore, it's very, very interesting. And this is our approach to sustainability, because then I will stop and give the word further. Our approach at the moment is that we are using system dynamics as a methodology. And we have created one of the, over the last 20 years, one of the most sophisticated land use transport interaction models, completely based on system dynamics, where we can test the long-term impacts and feedbacks in a country, or say it in a metropolitan area or something like this. And this gives, I don't know, we have all the problems what you said, data collection, calibration, and all this stuff. But at least now we can learn a little bit what will be the long-term effects of the feedbacks in the system, and we can discuss it. And this was really for me at least, a very good learning process over the last 20 years to understand a little bit better what's going on outside. And then the last sentence is, if you look outside the settlement structure at the moment, just look outside the window, then you see a transport system and a settlement structure which is based on decisions made 15 years ago, because we have a very long long time delays in the whole system. And therefore, this is something what I mention is that if we want to reach CO2 neutrality in 2050, we have to start yesterday to implement measures, not today. So good.
Let's start talking about this. I mean, Günter, you mentioned already in the beginning, and I think this is a really great discussion opener, that you have strong concerns that automation or electrification might not be the solution to climate crisis. So what are your takes on that, dear panelists? Günter, do you want to start?
I really, yes, I want to start. I think it's quite interesting. If I listen all the time to automation, then there was a hype 5, 6, 7 years ago. It started at this time. So nearly all research projects around the world were dealing with automation because it's the solution of the future. Then you know that it was completely industrial driven. And the funny thing is there is already enough automation out. All of our cars are equipped with GIS systems. So, and what we can do now is we can use them to say, okay, if you are if you're speeding, then you have to pay a fine. Or if you park your car, you can already pay a parking levy or something like this, or on all places around the world. So we have all the technology except the steering, but the other technology is already there, and we should just apply it. So we don't have to wait for the automation that we have level 5 cars on the roads, so we can already use it, but we don't do it. If I go to one of the politicians in Austria and say, okay, use the GPS system in the cars for parking fees, or say for a smart road pricing. Smart road pricing means that you pay for every road, because every trip is tracked. Then you know the morning peak, evening peak, then you know that the road type you use, you can already implement it. It's no problem at all. You don't have to wait. So this would be a smart application of the existing technology. We don't have to wait to level 5.
Susan, I saw you nodding in either agreement or disagreement. Do you want to continue?
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't agree more. Automation has been hyped, and researchers have followed right along with that. And Günter's entirely correct. There's many levels of automation, and there's a lot of automation on our cars today. And those types of automation can prevent a lot of accidents and reduce a lot of congestion, and be used in many ways that can advance social and environmental goals. Level 4 and level 5, the highest levels of automation as defined by SAE, US Department of Transportation. Those are things that we're testing, and we're seeing a lot of level 4. I'm tracking a lot of developments across the globe. US level 4 is becoming quite predominant in terms of shared automated microtransit types of services. I think level 5, many in the industry think that that's going to be 2050 or beyond. Some experts at UC Berkeley would suggest it's even further away than 2050. So I think the challenge here is to not get enamored with technology, but to understand the role that technology can play in advancing social and environmental goals. The thing that I think is the silver lining about the automation discussion is that I've seen a lot of cities starting to think about, well, gosh, if this happens so quickly, how do we respond to it? And asking questions about what type of world do we want to live in? And how should we prioritize our street space? And I think that's a conversation we should have been having decades ago, not waiting for automation to prompt us to think, oh goodness, is this going to lead to a dystopian future? I think the car already has led to a dystopian future. So we should have been responding a lot longer ago, because I think that's led us to the point we are now, where transportation is the leading cause of anthropogenic emissions. And it's going to be really hard to get that genie back into the bottle. I think the most powerful of tools we have, which is only going to get us so far, is electrification. And the behavioral change must come along with land use changes. But we really, as a society, holistically need to embrace this. And I think start to prioritize lower speed modes of transportation, which are more sustainable in nature, and dedicate more of our city space to walking and cycling. And as I mentioned before, Johanna, the thing that really concerns me is as we become more and more technologically sophisticated and dependent, which is happening with mobile technology and digitization, these technologies are going to leave people behind. And so how do we prevent that in the developing world, the global South? How do we learn from one another? I think we have a lot of challenges ahead, and I think automation has been a nice distraction.
Oh, very powerful words. Thank you so much. Alexander, do you want to add something?
I guess I cannot add anything. I mean, obviously, it would be nice if solutions would be more on the technical level, right? Because our own hope is always on the technical level. And I'm really not an expert in making now a statement about how the future should look, etc. Right? But obviously, less is more, right? And that's always true when you have an increasing world population, right? If you have many more people who have more capabilities of moving, etc., right? Then all of us need to do less, right? And I guess that's in the long run, from a very simplistic point of view, right, the only way we can make it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, this already brings us, I think, to a really pressing next question. So what are actually like strategies for individuals? What can we do? What behavior changes are needed to achieve sustainable transport goals? So I think this could be, yeah, I don't know, maybe Günter, you want to add on this?
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, of course, I would like to add on this. I said, we are, in our department, we are transport planning. And the most important, maybe you have seen our logo, so that the human being is in the middle of our planning. And what we know is that the human being is a biological being. And what we know is that you can influence the behavior of human beings by the structure. So if you have a pedestrian zone, people will walk. If you have a nice environment for cycling, people will cycle. But what we have done in the past, and what was transport planning in the past for the last 100 years, we rearranged the cities that they fit very well to cars and not to human beings. And now I see that in the last 5-6 years, since maybe this Friday for Future movement starts a little bit, that also young people now think, okay, we are living in cities and we want to get the space back. A car is not that important anymore. And now we have a redistribution, or at least a discussion starts about the redistribution of space in the cities and give it back to walking and cycling and so-called active modes. And I think this is very, very important. And only if we reconstruct the environment in cities, then people will change their means of transport. Because if you have 3 roads in front of your house, and if you have a parking space in front of your house, and you don't pay the real cost, then people behave like they do today, because for them it's the most convenient way to move from A to B. And this is something what we have to learn to understand. And to be honest, I don't know, but a lot of you, what they're doing in your holidays. When you're going to holidays, normally you go to a city in Italy. I don't know which city you go in the United States, but in Europe, you go to an old historic city and you enjoy being there because you want to walk and you want to be seen from other people. That's the most important issue. This is quality. This is the quality of design. And you never go to a highway and they can walk there. So that's some of the messages I want to give you. We have to go back and we have to create cities and structures that people can behave in the right way. And this is transport planning. Transport planning changed from dealing with roads and pavements and let's say lanes or something like this. Coming back, the human being is the scale of city planning, and this will help us. And therefore, sorry, you don't need a lot of technology for that. Some people don't want to hear this. Walking is for free, and walking does not need any track of your movements, because this is something what a lot of technologies will do at the moment. They will track all the movements with your mobile phone and with your Oyster card and all this stuff, because then you have to pay. They want to make that they want to pay for every small trip of the day. And this is something what we should avoid or something. The human being want to move freely without tracking or something like that. I don't want that you know where I have been this afternoon. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Anyone else from the panelists want to add on this? Then I would like to tackle what Susan already mentioned. I think this is like a really important topic, which is often underseen, which are challenges in social equity and the interconnection of health, environmental, social, and racial equity. So maybe Susan, you can elaborate a little bit here and tell us how equity and environmental justice relate to transportation and urban planning.
Thank you for that question. You know, about a year ago, the pandemic hit, a little bit over a year ago. And I think the pandemic, across the globe, really revealed a lot of vulnerabilities and inequities. And I think got a substantial number of people thinking about, not just about social equity more broadly, but also racial inequities, environmental justice. And it's not that environmental justice and these discussions are new, but I think it reinvigorated a lot of thoughtful conversation. And as an academic, I see academia really trying to grapple with this and to think about how we're teaching our students, how we're addressing this topic with students. In particular, how are we bridging the gap between social equity and justice and disciplines like engineering that might not talk about these things in classes because they're more focused on algorithms and models or artificial intelligence or a lot of these exciting technologies that we've talked about today. So I think, you know, a really big challenge is, I think, understanding what we don't know. And what we do know is that a lot of the metrics that we use to measure accessibility don't capture a lot of people. We're missing a lot of people. And if anybody on this panel or in the audience does research on human beings, you will know how difficult it is to get access to a robust sample that is well represented and populated with low-income individuals, potentially individuals that don't have access to technology. And that's not necessarily just low-income populations. It's elderly people. It's people who speak a second or first language that isn't the dominant language. So a lot of the technologies may preclude their language of comfort. It also includes a lot of people with physical disabilities, people living in rural areas that don't have good access to broadband. And I think we have to think deeply about what types of metrics we're using and what type of data we're collecting. We can't know or see what we don't try to measure. And so a lot of the thinking I've been doing over the last year, done a lot of reading on these topic areas. And I think what we have to do is really focus on intentional inclusion of populations that we have left behind, particularly how they respond to what we call a solution. And if you notice, I have not used that term once because I think that term is overused. Like this technology is the solution or a major solution. I think we have to assume that populations that we haven't been actively engaging may not have the same response to these advanced technologies or deem them a solution. So I think intentional inclusion is going to be a very big part of our future in terms of helping us understand their stories, understand what it is that they would like to co-create in terms of strategies, and learning better how to collect data and make measurements to inform these models. Earlier, we talked a lot about models. Yes, models are a wonderful thing, but models are still leaving people out. And so how do we go about embracing equity, I think, in a more authentic way and helping our students learn how they can engage and carry this forward? But thank you for the opportunity to answer that question.
Thank you so much, Susan. What an important topic, and I agree. Like education is key. Alexander, Günter, do you want to add to this topic, to this conversation?
Yeah, just a short notice about that modeling might leave out people. So obviously the models we develop, right? So it's up to us to develop models which just suit it better. I mean, from my perspective, right, the only thing on how you can say anything about a highly complex system, also in the long run, right, is a model. But obviously, we might use the wrong data to calibrate models, right? We might also, obviously, sometimes not have the big picture which we should have to actually design good models, right? Yeah, but obviously, that you pre-movement, so.
I just can say, Susan, you're completely right. I think this is a very important topic that we have to include all people in a city or in a country that they can fulfill their daily needs with the existing transport system. And just to let you know, as a I'm teaching at the civil faculty at the Technical University, and all our students, and I know it's not that, but all our students have to walk around with using a wheelchair for at least 1 hour. And they have to use 2 public transport modes in Vienna, and they have to go to a shop and to buy something just to open their eyes, because one of the problems is that the civil engineers and the transport planners normally are male, 25 to 35 years old, and car drivers. And they see completely the transport system from their point of view. And therefore we said, okay, use a wheelchair, then you see this line on a plan or on a map. This is a barrier you can't come over if you can't walk. But this is just a small eye opener for them. And coming back, how to measure it a little bit. I think I also do some special lectures for creating public space for disabled people, say it in this way. It's quite interesting to open the eyes of students. And for example, in Vienna, it's quite interesting. I don't know if you've ever been here. I just can invite all of you to go to Vienna and use the public transport system, in the city. I think this is one of the most barrier-free transport system. You can nearly move from every place to every other place. Either you are blind or with a wheelchair. And it took us nearly 30 years to convince all the people around that they need an elevator, for example, for every station, something like this. But this was a process, 30 years. That now we have a really good position, and then you can measure it somehow, because you see what happened in Austria or in Vienna is that a lot of women now are walking with their child buggy in the city, and they can use the public transport system. You can't do this in other cities. And if you go to Asia or something like this, it's not possible, because you always have the steps there. So it's a very important topic. I completely agree with you, and it's really interesting to travel around the world and to see on which states different countries are. It's really great. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much. So before we open up the questions to the audience and cover the questions which are already in the chat, I would have like one last sort of elephant in the room question because of this weird situation we are all in right now. This is a question which we have to think of, which is the impact of COVID-19 on transportation, right? I mean, so many things have changed during this weird time. And of course, we've also seen how this part of our life changed drastically. What do you think are the short and the long-term changes or trends, both the European but also the US side? Are there any difference? What do you think might stick? What will be gone soon? I don't know, Susan, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. I think it's such an important topic, and I believe this will be with us for some time because the virus is very difficult to contain, and it's a global phenomenon. So while one country may be looking like it's doing really well, then you see a surge again. And so I think what is certain is uncertainty. I think a lot has changed because of COVID. Here in the US, we saw crazy reduction in VMT, like a 40% drop like in the course of a week, which is unprecedented. You know, when we went through the Great Recession in 2008, we saw 3.5% reduction in vehicle miles traveled, just to give you some perspective of what this pandemic did. We've seen globally upwards of 80% reduction in public transit ridership. So this is a threat to public transit and public transit's ability to survive and recover from this. A lot of public transit agencies have had to be really nimble, and many of them have done great things in terms of innovation with respect to really focusing on transit-dependent populations, more low-income essential workers, changing their routes, reducing service hours in other locations. But I think the impacts on public transit concern me a lot, Johanna, because what we know is that vehicle licensing increased. And so we didn't see a ton of new cars being purchased, but what we saw was used cars being purchased. So what worries me, because I study the economics of car ownership a lot in the context of my research, is that means people are then becoming dependent on a fixed asset, and they're less likely to be aware of the marginal costs of their trips. And so they're less inclined, at least here in the US, once they have that car, they've got the ultimate point-to-point mobility. Why would I take public transit or walk or cycle? So this, I think, is a really big concern alongside work from home practices. We don't entirely know how companies are going to come back. Some of them are starting to state what they're going to do, but this also has a feedback effect on public transit and the public transit model and its ability to pay for itself. I could go on and on because I've done a study on this particular topic area. I'm continuing to work on it. I'd love to end on a higher note of stating that one of the things that we've been tracking across the globe is a lot of interest in active transport. And we've seen a lot of interest in electric bikes and pedal bikes. Cities across the globe dedicating lanes to safe streets. We've seen more parklets, more people really engaging with their cities in a way we haven't seen in a long time, which I think brings into question the role of the car in a city. But at some point, I think the rubber is going to hit the road when people want to get back to those cities with those cars that they've acquired or those concerns about virus transmission. And I worry from a policy standpoint how we're going to work through curbside management because it's changed a lot. But I think we're going to be looking at this for some time going into the future. The last thing I wanted to tell you is that I'm part of a group that volunteered time through my research center at Berkeley to collect data on global activities in response to COVID-19. And it's a free resource. and it tracks hundreds of activities in other cities and public-private partnerships. It's called covidmobilityworks.org. And you can go there to see a lot of what those responses were. But lots of uncertainty ahead.
Thank you so much. Günter, maybe you can share a little bit your perspective. What would be also interesting would be, of course, like the Austrian point of view.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, Susan, I think you rose a lot of interesting topics, especially public transport and mass transit in your country. I think this is very interesting because in Europe, you know, the system is a little bit different. Here, the public transport is owned by the public, and therefore we have a lot of subsidies, and therefore it was not that big problem. But that the public transport will survive, and there were different coping strategies. That in some countries they increased the frequency, for example, and so that people were able to use it. In some other countries, they said, okay, we reduce the parking fees so that people can use the car during the pandemic. So it was really diverse, and I think there was no clear picture also in Europe how they should deal with this. It was quite interesting. Just by the way, we did the literature review. There was no regarding the risk of getting COVID using public transport, and the risk is very, very low. But there were different studies. One interesting study was, for example, conductors in Germany don't get COVID very easily because they have a stronger immune system, because they were exposed to a lot of other people or during their work time, and therefore they have a very strong immune system. So just to let you know, it's quite interesting. And what is also very interesting, if we don't change anything, there will not, I don't know, just reading the news, listening to the news in Austria this weekend. This was the first weekend after the lockdown, and what happened, all people wanted to travel again for a short trip holiday. So still the transport system if you don't change the structure, if you don't change the pricing structure, people are already used to move around in Europe, for example. They think it's normal that you have a weekend trip per plane to London for 15 euros or 80 euros or something like this, and you deserve it 5 times a year, something like this. So this is not the mindset of people in Europe. They have no idea what impact traveling will have on the environment at the moment, because you don't pay the price. And this is really one of the problems. So as long as we don't change anything here, we really get the social problems, because we know that only the rich 5% of the world population is using a plane. And paying for that are all the poor people around the globe and the environment. And as long as we don't change this, people will not change their behavior. This is really something. What I said before. A human is a biological is an animal somehow, and it behaves like the structure says it should behave. So if the price is too cheap, then people will use the plane. If the parking place is in front of your house, people use the car. If the fuel price is very cheap, then they do it. And the best indicator for this is the modal split, you know, the mode share, the number of trips. And then you always see what's going on. I think this is a very good indicator that you see what is the most rational thing a person in a certain structure should do. And we have to change this, and then we have to measure it. And to be honest, I don't see that there will be a change, because everyone and every government around the world says we have to go back to the old way. The same was in the crisis 2008. Nothing changed. We know there was a bubble. In your case, I don't know, the housing bubble, and it exploded, and nothing changed. Now we have the Bitcoin bubble, and we have the automatic the digitization bubble or something like this. Nothing is changing. As long as we don't think, as long as we don't discuss when is enough, you know, not always maximizing the GDP or the GDP growth. We have to find the new indicator, and then we say, okay, this is enough. I think my life is really nice. I can't eat more. I can't travel more. I'm really a happy person. But we also have to think what the other people can do. And this is something, a completely new way of discussion. And And I'm really looking forward coming back that Friday for Future people are doing this a little bit, hopefully. But sorry, but in Austria we also have these demonstrations on Friday, and then they say, okay, please save the energy or something, and on Saturday they have to go with their parents to London or something with a flight trip or something like this. So we have to be careful. People sometimes the behavior is not what they are saying. In this way.
Thank you, Günter. And Alexander, maybe your take on that, and a question from the chat, which would be already tackled that too, and might fall into your direction too. How are the models incorporating what we've seen in the past year, the pandemic year, such as work from home, use of bicycles, home deliveries of goods, and so on and so forth? Maybe.
So that's actually a very good question. I have not worked on this, so I cannot say anything. I have worked actually on, let's say, modeling the corona spread, but not the impact on transportation. So from that perspective, I cannot say too much, but I would maybe try to take a bit of a positive thing, right? We have learned what we can do, right, if it's necessary, right? And this pandemic seemed to be necessary to take serious measures, right? And if you look into some changes, right? So for instance, we all meet online now, right? Which is nice, right? And it still works. Of course, it would be nicer to sit in a room, right? Not over, let's say, over several countries, but we can see that some changes, in particular from our perspective as researchers mainly, right, could be maybe making conferences more online, right? Very easy solution, right? You don't need to travel for 8 hours or sometimes for 12 hours to get somewhere where we are then for 4 hours, right? And then you move back. I mean, these are obvious, and this was clear also, 30 years ago, right? That this is not very efficient. And I guess when you look from the perspective of how home office becomes more, let's say, approachable, right? Then I guess there is also a huge incentive for companies, in particular for those who can actually do it, right? Obviously, there are jobs where you cannot do this, but otherwise, where you would say, well, we don't need so much working space anymore, right? People, at least as a percentage of people can stay at home, and of course, that will easy up the thing. But in the end, it's always what Günter, I guess, very prominently prescribed. Yeah, we need to change the way of thinking. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Another question from the audience would be, I was wondering if the panelists can comment on how academic research, for instance, modeling and data analysis on sustainable strategy scenarios can transform into successful policies that have led to meaningful impacts. Do you have any favorite example stories of such? Maybe Günter or Alexander or Susan, any favorite stories?
No.
That was a good answer.
I'm reading the question. Susan, maybe you are faster with the reading.
You can always, of course, let's say, look at specific measures, right? And when you say we want to, let's say, lower a specific measure, right? Then, of course, you can see something. And then, obviously, you can also decrease this a bit. And maybe you can even, as I said, right, decrease it by 20, 30%, right? In the end, the offset is still there, right? And that's the main problem. So I guess, for instance, with more, I would still say it, with more, let's say, information about network states, etc., right? You can, of course, improve the system, assuming that the demand is fixed. Right, but the problem is to which extent, right? And I guess it's
this
maybe
was the nice word. The demand is fixed, and this is the problem, because in transport planning we have this feedback: the demand is not fixed, and this is really one of the problems. And always when I hear this word, I get the red ear. I have to say this because this is always the transport modeling discussion. Sorry.
No, actually my point. So yeah.
So I'd love to respond to the question. So scenario planning and modeling can be very, very helpful in policy making, because it can show if we crank down on certain things in terms of policies, what it can do, for example, to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I was part of a team of 33 researchers this past year working on a study for the California Environmental Protection Agency that wanted us to examine, with the suite of existing policies we have in California, and I think Günter and Alexander and Johanna, you probably know that California is one of the leaders in this area internationally in terms of being really progressive with its policies. Doesn't always get everything perfect, but at least gives it a go, right? And so what we did is we used a lot of existing studies. I was on the vehicle miles traveled reduction team. So I was working with a lot of what we call demand elasticities. So, if you provide more carpool lanes or high occupant vehicle lanes, what kind of change of behavior might happen and stick alongside other progressive types of policies. So think electrification, hydrogen, these types of things. And here's a ray of hope. When this team of 33 scientists across the UC system came together with the existing pot of policy tools and also creating scenarios around new policy tools, for example, cordon pricing, curbside pricing, these types of things, we were actually able to achieve the carbon neutrality 2045 goal. But a lot has to happen. And a lot on the vehicle miles traveled side had to do with very progressive policies around affordable housing and housing densification, particularly around public transit, possibly giving us more of effect that we see in European cities. So those scenarios could come to pass, particularly if California policymakers really dig into that report and say, we've got to start doing more in order to increase the demand elasticities or responsiveness to different types of pricing policies or land use policies. But I think scenario planning and modeling are extremely powerful tools. Stay tuned, the story is not completely told, so I'm not sure this is my favorite story, but I will tell you it was exceptionally gratifying to work alongside all of these other scientists to try to see what we could do in transportation to hit the 2045 goals.
Thank you so much. So we are already running out of time. So this was a fantastic discussion and such a I would love to go on, and I hope most of the questions were covered by the follow-up discussions by the panelists. So thank you so much from my side, and I would like to give the word back to Julia.
Thank you, Joanna, for moderating this very engaging discussion. Thank you to our audience for your engaging participation with your questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them within this short hour, but especially thanks to our panelists today, Günter, Susan, and Alexander, for your fascinating perspectives on this topic that's very important, as we know, and we hope this is not the last of these conversations on sustainable transportation, especially in the wake of COVID-19 and its continued impacts on our mobility in our urban spaces. So I'm going to put in the chat a link to a brief survey. We would love our audience's perspectives on today's event. We will be following up with the recording, and I want to thank you all again for joining us. Thanks also to our co-sponsors, again, the Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment at UC Berkeley and the Institute of Transportation Studies, and to the Office of Science and Technology in Washington, DC. Wonderful to see you all, and hope to see you again at a future Institute of European Studies event. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot also from my side. Bye.
Thank you.